America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. FacepalmAmerica.com is where you can get more information about the show. Connect with us on social media, listen to past episodes, all that sort of good thing. As you may know, as we have talked about on this program before, we're coming up on an election. We got about a year. And it looks at this point, though there are many who would like him to step aside and make way for another generation of candidates, that Joe Biden is going to continue running for president of the United States, run for the Democratic nomination. He will probably get it. And it is sort of a crossroads for the party. Over the last 30 years or so, it has changed quite a lot. It has become a different sort of organization. It seems like it doesn't represent the little guy as much as it once did, and its focus has shifted a lot, and it doesn't resonate as it once did with its grassroots. And there are a lot of folks who are complaining about that. I know I've complained about it on this show before, and you have messaged me with your complaints along those lines as well. So I want to talk about the transformation, how it has occurred, what appears to be happening to the party at the moment, and to help us in that discussion, we have with us John Judis. He serves as editor-at-large at Talking Points Memo. He used to be senior writer at National Journal, senior editor at The New Republic, and his latest book, written with Ruy Teixeira, is Where Have All the Democrats Gone? The Soul of the Party in the Age of Extremes. John, welcome to Facepalm America. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, nice to be there.
So what would you say has been, from your perspective, the primary shift in the last generation in the Democratic Party? How has it transformed in your eyes?
Well, the main shift has been one group is gone out and another group has come in. The group that has come into the party in the last, and now we're not talking about 30, but maybe 40, 50 years, is one, professionals. Don't think of dentists and don't think of architects, but again, think of nurses and teachers. People whose job is defined by their achieving certain kinds of excellence, curing people, teaching people, rather than bottom line, not commission, not involved in profit making.
Right.
That group used to be Republican. Starting in the late 1980s, it started to shift toward the Democrats. Dukakis won them. That was the first time. And they're now 15% or so of the electorate. And they're a big part, too, of the Democratic Party leadership. Women also used to be, Jerry Ford won the women's vote in 1976. And starting in 1980, they start to shift into the Democratic Party, and particularly single women. Minorities, blacks came in the 60s with a vengeance. I mean, they started to come in during the Roosevelt days, especially the North, as the Southern blacks get the vote. In the 1960s, they become a major part, and probably blacks and Jews are the most dependable constituencies, 80, 90%. Hispanics always had been, but again, not overwhelming, a Democratic vote. And Asians, especially Chinese Americans who had not been, who again had been Republicans from the era of Chiang Kai-shek and things like that, they come into the party in the 1990s. So you put together these three groups, new minorities, single women, and professionals. They all come in. Who goes out? White working class. Broadly defined as people who don't have a 4-year college degree. Increasingly defined also by geography, by economic geography. people from small towns and mid-sized towns that specialized in manufacturing or mining or resource extraction of some kind start to move from the Democratic Party to the Republican. And, of course, that includes states like West Virginia that are poor states, but it also includes a state like North Dakota. Used to have 2 Democratic senators, now does not have any Democratic high officials. And what's the difference? Again, oil, important resource extraction state, and Democrats, climate change. So the white working class starts to leave. They used to be the center of the old New Deal majority. And what's happened in the last 4 years or so, or let's say since 2016, that there's also been a slippage particularly among Hispanic working class voters. Mm-hmm. They've started to go. They haven't gone out the door. They haven't flooded out the door. But the Democrats have lost in places like in southern Texas that they never had lost before. So now, I mean, Rui and I don't any longer speak of the loss of the white working class, but of the working class vote. And our assumption is that if you're a party of the people, you can't sacrifice that vote. That has to be part of your majority.
So what have you seen that the Democratic Party once offered to the working class that, at least in the opinion of the working class, given their voting with their feet, they're no longer offering to them? What changed, and why did it change?
Well, that's a complicated story, and I think the central thing really is probably economic security. Mm-hmm. And programs like Social Security and Medicare that were universal in their impact. Beginning maybe not with Social Security, but it became universal as it was amended. Beginning, let's say, even in the 60s and continuing through Obamacare, the Democrats offer programs that many middle-class people see themselves paying to subsidize the poor, but not necessarily getting any benefits from it. I think that was crucial to to what happened with Obamacare in 2010 and 2014, where it was a key issue for the Republicans, and where all of a sudden these voters who made, let's say, more than $60,000 and who were not subsidized under the way Obamacare worked, saw their premiums going up. Maybe not as up as it would have been without that, but that's not again, we're not your average voter doesn't have a calculator like that. So I think that, again, away from universal programs toward programs that could be understood as welfare. In the 90s, embrace of free trade, NAFTA, WTO, and in the early 2000s, even though Republicans voted for these things, the Democrats really get the blame in all these towns that suffer from deindustrialization, especially from the China trade. And there's, estimates of as many as 4 million votes go out the window because of that.
Given that the Democratic Party had a working class base at that time, what was the rationale in making a decision that was likely to undermine it? What was the trade-off that it made? I mean, was it essentially just selling out to corporations and global interests? Because it kind of seems like it was doing that.
I think what happened was not so much an explicit sellout, but it was the decline of the labor movement. The labor movement had been a central part of the Democratic coalition. About 1 in 3 of non-farm workers in the 1950s that belonged to labor unions. And labor was the biggest mass organization in the Democratic Party. A lot of the funds came from labor. And a lot of the local activism came from labor, and some of the candidates themselves were workers. They weren't necessarily high-flying lawyers. In the 1970s, you get this corporate offensive in alliance with the Republicans against labor and using the labor laws to not to facilitate collective bargaining, but to stifle it. And a lot of the companies start moving overseas. They move south to right to work states, and now it's 6% of the private sector is. And
it's interesting because policies like NAFTA actually, encouraged that, and these were policies that were, supported, if not by the entire Democratic Party, certainly the section of the Democratic Party, the DLC, President Clinton, who was, in a position to push it in a big way. So, it's interesting balancing cause and effect, because it seems like perhaps to a degree responding to a decline in labor unions, which one can possibly attribute to policies, in the 1980s brought about by Republicans, but also kind of furthering what was going on in that regard, also undermining labor unions at the same time.
But look, for NAFTA, the Democrats in Congress actually were against it. Clinton needed, in the House, he needed Republican votes in order to pass NAFTA. It was mainly what we call the donor class operating on the presidency.
Right. Yes.
Robert Rubin from Goldman Sachs being a key figure in the Clinton administration. And without the presence of labor at the table, or with labor having only a weak voice, really you get the Democratic Party, its governing council, its power within Washington is a kind of alliance between, on the one hand, Democratic business, which is again some construction, Wall Street, Hollywood, and then of course now Silicon Valley is crucial. And on the other hand, the organizations from the 60s, feminist, civil rights, immigration lobby, which have an inordinate power, but again, key economic issues become neglected. You have, you have the labor unions and you have the Nader people, but they're no longer as powerful a group within the party.
The key economic issues of ordinary working people become ignored, and the key economic issues of powerful donors become very central to the interests of the Democratic Party at that point. It seems like there's a quote that I remember. I'm going to screw it up a little bit here, that I have heard a number of times. It comes from Senator Chuck Schumer. In the last few years, it seems to encapsulate this mentality. And I think he said, for every working class vote we lose in Pittsburgh, we're going to pick up 2 in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And that seems to say a lot about where their focus was in terms of who they were going after.
Yeah, he must not have said Pittsburgh, because the Democrats still win Pittsburgh, but they lose the western part of the state.
They certainly do. Yeah.
In other words, the exurbs of Pittsburgh that head towards Ohio, and that's been critical. I used to say this to my co-author Rui when we were doing the emerging Democratic majority. It was clear because of climate change that the Democrats were going to lose West Virginia. Mm-hmm. But I used to say, well, they'll lose West Virginia, but we'll win Virginia because of the northern Virginia suburbs.
Unfortunately, there was a little bit of a lag there, but it did happen eventually.
And I don't think the Democrats will win back West Virginia because of those factors, because they're not going to compromise on that. But losing Ohio, that's something different. Trump's victory in 2016 was a real wake-up call when he won that whole swath of Rust Belt states that had not gone Republican for a long time. Right. So it turned out to be a bad trade-off.
Right. And while you write off West Virginia, I mean, let's take a look at Ohio for a moment, because while at least presidentially speaking, for the last couple of cycles, that has, as you say, become a red state. Clearly, there is an undercurrent of actual progressive politics there. We just saw Ohio put through an initiative that, in